Welcome back to Music 101. We're starting chapter 26. We're actually going to skip chapter 25 if you're interested. The PowerPoint will be online as well as some information, but we won't be testing over that material. We're going to skip over to 26, which is talking about the Baroque dance suites. And this is really an important part of instrumental music during the Baroque era. And these suites were used by several of the composers, specifically Handel and Bach as well, to promote their instrumental music. So Baroque instruments were, in Baroque, there was a focus on instruments and instrumental music. As you know, we listened to one composer that started composing for instrumental music in the Renaissance era, but since the Renaissance ended and Baroque era started, instrumental music became more popular and more composers wrote for it, and the orchestra was becoming bigger and more instruments involved and things like that. You're going to see this as a trend in instrumental music, that the more further down we get the timeline, the bigger the orchestra is going to be getting, and the louder the orchestra is going to be getting. So instrumental music was encouraged by wealthy patrons, and it was a collaboration of craftspeople and musicians because craftspeople had to make the instruments. Instruments were featured in a large scale in Baroque genres, like I just said a minute ago, and elaborate instrumental music conveyed grandeur on special occasions. So we're going to listen to some of it, and you can kind of see what I'm talking about with the elaborate instrumental music. There were dramatic improvements to instruments. As we know, there was the rebec and other ancestors of the string instrument. So we now have the violin and the cello, or the violoncello, or I'm blanking on the name, but it was something to viola da gamba, which means to be held between the legs, and so that would be the ancestor of the cello, and the string bass as well as the viola are coming out now. The strings were made from gut, not catgut, as a lot of people like to think, but it wasn't. It was actually like sheep guts or something like that. Softer and more penetrating sound. And in northern Italy, 3 string instrument makers made a big impact on the string world, and it's still a huge impact to today. And those 3 names were Stradivarius, Granari, and Amati. These 3 makers made not that many instruments, but their instruments were very well made, and they're still sought after to this day. So very famous musicians and string instruments use these brands, if you will, or makers to this day. So I'll show you kind of a picture of a Stradivarius, and they're worth millions and millions, maybe billions of dollars. Woodwinds were all made out of wood at the time. So remember, woodwinds are not necessarily made out of wood because flute is made out of metal. But back in the time, all of them were made out of wood. They had expanded range, hence the name woodwinds, subtly, and suggested pastoral scenes because they wanted it to, sound like a flute or that a shepherd would have, kind of like a panpipe type thing that like Peter Pan plays, that kind of sound. The brass were very natural instruments. They were valveless, which demanded virtuosity. And I will show you what I mean in just a minute. I'm going to show you some pictures of what I mean by valveless and the comparing difference of like a trumpet today and a trumpet then. There was a bright sonority about it. In other words, the sound sounded really bright and piercing. The French horn was mellow and had a hunt-like sound. So back in the day when they would have fox hunts, they had some sort of horn that would release the commands for the dogs. And so that's what the type of horn they used. So they were basically incorporating instruments they were using in every day. So, for example, they kind of expanded out on the rebec for the string instruments to make the violin, etc., etc. The woodwinds were maybe like an expansion of like the recorder or a sort of pan flute that they used in like the fields. And then the brass for the trumpets were, of course, to announce like royalty and things like that, but also the French horn, which was used for hunting calls. And there was a recent interest in authenticity of these sounds. So this is a painting, a Baroque painting of someone playing a violin here, and you can notice there's no chin rest. So if you see me when I played my violin in class, I had it up on my shoulder, and I had a chin rest, and I place it. She's bracing it against her shoulder, and the grip on her bow is different from that of modern players. And actually, back in the day, the Baroque bow was completely different from a actual modern bow, and I'll kind of show you some pictures of that. But there was no screw. So on my violin, and I'll show you pictures, there's an actual screw on the end of the bow, and they didn't have that in Baroque times. You controlled the tension with your fingers, and it looked more kind of like an archery bow than an actual bow that looks like today. And there was actually a French guy, French bow maker named Tort, and he's the one that created the Tort screw, and that's why we have a screw in our bows today. So I'll show you a picture and kind of show you the difference between Baroque instruments and modern instruments. So this is a picture of an evening concert, and you can see we have harpsichord here. Harpsichord is an ancestor of the piano, and when the hammer hits instead of the hammer hitting the strings, there's little fine hooks, and it plucks the strings, and it gives it a completely different sound. And we have some string instruments being played here. They're all standing, notice. That's something else too. All the musicians stood. Looks like we have some drums here and some maybe brass and woodwinds here. And then all of the people are around looking at the concert. So that's something else to notice, is everyone was standing, not sitting like they do now. The Baroque Suite. The suite was a group of short dances. They were all in the same key. They had contrasting moods and were performed by a diverse array of instruments. And like I said, these were used by both composers, Johann Sebastian Bach, as well as Handel. So they had an international influence. There was the German Allemande, there was the French Courante, there was the Spanish Sarabande, English Gigue. Other dances is the minuet, the gavotte, the bourrée, the passepai, the horn, and the hornpipe. And sometimes it opened with an overture, which was just an opening number to announce, I guess, everybody that the dances were starting. They were binary form, so AABB. So there was the section. They repeat the section, moves from home key to a contrasting key, and then which moves on to the B section, which has their contrasting key, usually closely related in tonality. In other words, they were similar in key, but not the same key. But they fit together, if that makes sense. So it wasn't like A and F sharp. It'd be like A and D. So they fit together. Or ternary, ABA. So it'd be the first section, a different contrasting section in the middle, and then the same section coming back. And they were written for solo instrument, chamber ensembles, as well as orchestra. So the two most familiar or famous works were by Handel, and that's Water Music, which was 5-movement orchestral suite, and Music for the Royal Fireworks, which that tells you right there. Water Music was for an outdoor performance on the Thames River in London for a royal party. It had very lively rhythms and catchy melodies. And so this is an example of the Thames River in London. I went on a boat tour there when I was in London. It was pretty cool. Similar to what the Water Music would have been. So people would have been out on boats listening to the music. So we're going to listen to some parts of the Water Music Suite. And the most famous movement, and when I play it for you, you're going to know exactly what I'm talking about. It's in ternary form. It has the first section, which is in major key, triple meter. In other words, 1, 2, 3, 1, 8, and 1, and you're going to hear it in just a second. The B section is a totally different key, and you're going to listen and hear that. And then it's a ternary, so it comes back to the A section, which is exactly the same. It's actually a repeat. So we're going to come back over here and we're going to listen. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Very famous. I play this for weddings all the time. A section again. Notice that's the French horns. That hunt-like sound. Strings. Still in the same key. This is still the A section. There's other sections within the A section, but it's still the A section. So the contrast. We're in a minor key now. This is be the B section. Mainly the strings. We played the entire Water Music Suite for my senior year. It was really awesome. Still the B section. And then return to the A section. That gives you kind of an idea. You can go back and listen to all of it, but it's an exact repeat. So there's nothing different about it. Like literally, if you were looking at the music, and there's not any more. It just tells you to go back and play the same thing that you just played. So there's also a listen for section. So please go back and do that if you are confused. But hopefully you heard that in what we were talking about here. So I don't know if you heard the decorative trills in the woodwinds, but it was like ba bee ba 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 bee ba ba bee ba ba da 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 bee ba 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 da da ba bee ba ba da da dee, and it has like ba da da, and then with the regal brass, of course, reflective minor key with strings and woodwinds, no brass, and then the brass will come back in the A section. So that kind of on page 150 in your book, it gives you kind of an overview of what we talked about and also a picture of what the music looks like as well. That's all for chapter 26, so we're going to be going into chapter 27 in the next lecture.